everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today, yes, it's January, but we are going to be doing my December wrap-up. It got left by the wayside with all of the end of the year content I was doing, so I'm finally ready to talk about the other books that I read in December, because December was, I think, one of my best reading months. I almost ran out of room on the page to write them down. I read 31 books in December. I had to move this sticker because I had to use up all of this space. I read 12 books from the library, 7 books that I owned, got the stack down here, 2 books from Libby or Hoopla, and then 9 books that were ebooks, EPUBs that I own or that were from NetGalley. I read 65% print and 35% digital. I read a lot more digital books than I normally do because I was at home with my family, and so I was reading a lot of ebooks. My top genres were fantasy, LGBT, romance, sci-fi, and contemporary. I read 100% fiction books, no nonfiction. And let's talk about my favorites and least favorites, the books that I would like to talk about. So let's see how I'm gonna do this. First of all, I want to talk about a reread I did. I finished rereading the Masquerade series by Seth Dickinson. The last book is The Tyrant by Cormorant, which is the book that I read this month. I probably started it in November, and then it just carried over into December because this is a big one. This is a big one, over 600 pages, and I love every second of it. I love this book. It is one of my favorite books ever. I love this series. It's probably tied with Realm of the Elderlings for my favorite series of all time. It just is so good, and I really wish more people read it. I feel like back in my day, you used to see people recommend Trader Baru Cormorant, like on Reddit and stuff, when people are looking for lesbian adult fantasy, or, you know, fantasy with a brutal, calculating female main character, and then just people either don't realize it's a series, or they are so shocked by what happens at the end of Trader that they don't continue on, or they get scared off realizing that it's a uncompleted series. The last book came out in 2020, so it's been quite a while without the last book in the series, what we're assuming is the last book in the series. And I'm just here to say, read it anyways. Like, truly, I always say this book ends on such a great note. Like, it feels like the perfect pausing point for this series. If you are worried to get into a series like A Song of Ice and Fire, where you just are left dangling on a cliff and you have no idea where the story is gonna go, and there's, you know, it's been 11 years and there's no news, there's no even like hint of news, this is not a situation like that, at least in my opinion. It's a very good stopping point for the series. Truly, I really do think we're gonna get the 4th book, because Seth Dickinson has talked on their blog, on their website, a little bit about like finishing drafts and then having to restart, and it being kind of a long process, and also holding down a day job while they're writing the 4th book in the Baru Cormorant series. So obviously it's taking a bit of a longer time, and I'm just like, take your time, truly, because even if we never got another book in the series, I would be very disappointed, and I would have wished we could have seen, you know, the author's vision for how it should have ended. But I would feel okay. I would feel like, okay, well, Baru sorry, I'm looking at my cat. Baru gets like an amount of catharsis in this book that I feel like really helps make me okay with waiting for the end of the series. And then there's a lot of plot wrap up, or at least development, to the point where we are wrapping up certain plot threads. There's still plenty to explore, and still plenty, again, that I want to see wrapped up in a book 4, but yeah, like I said, it doesn't feel like you're dangling over a cliff by your toenails. It feels like a good pausing point for the series. So please don't be scared off by thinking, oh, well, it's an unfinished series, you know, I can't do that, whatever. Please just pick it up anyways. It's so worth it. Tyrant in particular, I feel like just, you can really tell that Monster and Tyrant were supposed to be one gigantic book that got chopped in half, because Tyrant is just so satisfying, and it really brings everything together and finishes character arcs and finishes character arcs and starts new ones, and just weaves everything together so well, and I just love it so much. This is, again, one of my favorite books ever. And the prose, I love the prose in this series. That's probably what I think makes it stand out, I think, to me. First of all, it's just such an intelligent series, and such a smart, thoughtful series that deals with colonialism and imperialism and the economy, and especially a character like Baru, who is an autistic lesbian. But not only that, the prose of this series is just amazing. It's so unique, but it's not overdone or feel put on. Like, it just, Seth Dickinson's writing is just so unique and so wonderful. There are sentences in here, the vast majority of this book I feel like is, you know, unobtrusive prose, and then you get every so often, like probably every page or so, just a sentence that is so beautiful and so evocative or so weird and so interesting that it just makes you take notice of it. And that's what I like in prose, and that's what I consider to be good prose, at least to me. I think a lot of times in my videos when I'm talking about prose in a series, I tend to say that the prose was fine. I think I say a lot, it's not winning any awards. But it's fine. I notice I say that a lot in my videos. It's not winning any awards, but it's okay. But I say a lot that the prose is fine and it's unobtrusive. And to me, good prose is prose that is noticeable, but not in a way that detracts from your reading experience. I have had reading experiences where I have noticed prose in a bad way. We'll talk about that a little when we talk about some of the other books I read this month, but that was my experience of reading The Isle in the Silver Sea by Tasha Suri, an author whose prose I liked in her other series, but then in Isle in the Silver Sea, the prose was obtrusive in a way that it felt like it was taking away from my reading experience. I just couldn't get into the book because I'm like, this writing style feels so forced. It does not feel like Tasha Suri. Whereas in this book, this feels so Seth Dickinson. Like, I couldn't imagine anyone else writing this book, and it's just such a wonderful style. I have underlined so many bits of this book. It's just, again, it's just a writing style that I freaking love. It elevates what is already an amazing story and amazing characters to just a whole other level. And yeah, thank you for letting me do the opposite of ranting about this series. Thank you for letting me gush about this series for 7 minutes about how much I love this series. So I'll stop talking about it now, but yeah, please just read this series, please. I'm also going to talk about the Patricia McKillip books that I read this month. I said a couple of videos ago that I was kind of taking a little bit of a break from Patricia McKillip because I had just read a bunch of her books and they were all starting to feel a little bit samey to me. And I got a couple of recommendations on that video, I think from Kelly Rosen, I think is the person. Kelly Rosen is the one who recommended Umbria and Shadow to me when I was talking about reading a lot of Patricia McKillip's work. And then I also got a recommendation from someone on Reddit saying to read The Changeling Sea because that was also more of a single protagonist type of book as opposed to a large ensemble cast. And so I read both of those books and I enjoyed them both. I definitely thought that they were on the higher end of my Patricia McKillip ranking. I haven't disliked any of the books I've read from her, but certain ones have been more satisfying and certain ones have been like, well, that was beautiful. And again, her prose is so beautiful and her books are so short that even when I'm like, well, that was a book, I don't feel like I've wasted my time. I still have enjoyed my reading experience. But I do definitely think that Umbria and Shadow and The Changeling Sea were both, again, on my higher scale. I enjoyed those a little bit more than Bards of Bone Plain or Odd Magic or Belle at Sealy Head. I thought that Umbria and Shadow was very magical and beautiful, and I really loved the themes of parenthood, but especially adoptive parenthood. I feel like a lot of McKillip's work deal with a parent-child relationship, but this is the first time I've seen in her work families of choice or adoptive families, which were the two major parent-child dynamics in this book, especially a mother and a child. I thought that was a great focus and I really enjoyed reading about that. The ending of Umbria and Shadow was one of the most unsatisfying of her work. It was just like, I legitimately didn't understand what happened. I had to reread it and I still was like, what happened? And I had to look it up, and the ending that I had come up in my head I preferred. Like, the ending that I imagined in my head was that Kyle and Liddea had been like sucked into the shadow realm and like had come up with all of these fake memories of this beautiful life that they were having to like cope with that. And no, it turns out it's just a happy ending, like everybody's memories have been erased. And I was like, okay, interesting. Again, so liked that book, liked the prose in that a lot, liked the focus, but kind of a dissatisfying ending. And then The Changeling Sea, I thought it probably second to Alphabet of Thorn in terms of just having a satisfying and cohesive ending. That one was I think the plot of that one was really well done. It felt very satisfying. It's so short, it has such a narrow focus. It just is talking about grief and like what it means to be a human and what it means to be alive, and I really enjoyed those aspects of the book. And then something I have to shout out when it comes to Patricia McKillip is her romance. I feel like her books always have a little bit of a romantic element, but it stays so far in the background and like so secondary to the actual story that I don't really mind it. I feel like a lot of the time, again, I'm not a romantic person at all, especially when it comes to straight romances. I just cannot get into them. I think my problem is I just don't see chemistry between characters very well. That's why I can have a rom-com, or I like watching, you know, rom-coms or romances. But when it comes to reading about it, I'm just like, cringe, I can't do it. But in Patricia McKillop's stories, what I really like is that, again, her romances are not forefronted, and they're on usually not blatant. It's portrayed very subtly through glances and how the characters interact with each other in a different way than they interact with other people. And it's usually not just like, again, them telling the audience, oh, I like this person so much, they're so hot, but it's rather like just the smallest little hints and details. And that happened both in Ombre and Shadow with Lidea and the other guy whose name I can't remember, and you could honestly interpret that as platonic or romantic. Like, I think there's like the barest of hintings that he's interested in her, but you don't really know how she feels about that, and then it is not a focus in the epilogue, so I'm like, okay, interesting. And then in The Changeling Sea, again, it's this very, very subtle element that comes in at the very end, and I enjoyed that too. So enjoyed both of those works. Again, I probably will hold off on reading more of her work for a bit, but it feels like every single time I'm like, okay, I feel like I've read enough of McKillop now. I go on Reddit or I go on, you know, wherever, and I see 7 other books from her I've never heard of before, people being like, oh, this is her best one actually. I'm like, where are these books coming from? How many did she write? So I say that, but I'm probably not done. I also would like to talk about the 2 Naomi Novik books I read in December. I read Uprooted and Spinning Silver, which I got from the library. So I can't hold it up for you, but just know that it's there in spirit, and this one is here as well. I don't really feel like holding it up though. I've talked about it in videos before. I have not really liked any of Naomi Novik's published work before. I read Deadly Education for class and didn't like it. I read the Temeraire series. I've read like 4 books in that series, and it's interesting because it was like, I read them, but could I tell you anything about that series? No. Could I tell you anything about what I enjoyed about that series? No. And the charm of those books just got less and less with every book, and then it started to get like weirdly Orientalist in like the 4th book, and I'm like, I'm out of here. So didn't really enjoy either of those, but I have a love Naomi Novik's fan fiction, so I'm always like searching for a published work of hers that gives me that same buzz, and I picked up randomly on a whim her new novella, The Summer War, and really enjoyed that. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed that and how, again, close it was to the experience of reading her fan fiction, and it made me more curious in picking up her fairy tale retellings, which were the only books of hers that I hadn't picked up, because typically I just don't really love fairy tale retellings. I feel like it's, you know, with Patricia McKillop or like with Tanith Lee, like people like that, maybe like I'll pick one up, but I don't know. Sometimes I get really bored with them. I'm like, do I really just want to see someone retell the same story over and over again? Especially because I read a lot of Gail Carson Levine when I was a child, so I had a book of hers that was just like a bunch of short stories retelling fairy tales. So it's just one of those genres that I read a lot from when I was young and have just totally burned myself out on. I just don't enjoy it as an adult. It's the same with magic school books. I read a bunch of those as a child, loved them, and then now I just am not interested in them because I read so many as a child. But surprise, surprise, I ended up enjoying her fairy tale retellings way more than I've enjoyed anything else she's published. I feel like Uprooted I liked, but I had a couple of qualms with. I really did enjoy the story. I thought the pacing was really interesting. Like, it's just every time you're like, okay, I know what this story is about, we go a little bit further, and I did enjoy the fact that it was like, in any other story, the entirety of the plot would be them going into the forest to save Cassia. The pronunciation guide online says Kasha, so that's how I'm gonna say it. In any other story, this plot would be entirely just them going to the woods to save Kasha, and it would end with them saving her. And this book goes beyond that, and it deals with the political ramifications of a successful expedition into the forest to save someone and what that would do to the kingdom and how that would spiral. And I found that really interesting. That's always something I love in fantasy works, especially just the idea of like what happens after we do this big thing, like what are the ramifications of that. I thought the world building was really rich and well done. The magic system was really interesting. The forest was very creepy. I loved the atmosphere of this book. I loved the kind of, again, the vibes of this book, and the way that the themes ultimately came together at the end of the book, I feel like just were really satisfying. Like throughout the entire book, again, we are so just constantly moving and constantly developing the plot that I was like, where are we going with the themes of this book? Like, what is ultimately the message here? But then the ending just totally brought it all together and wrapped it up in a way that I found really satisfying. The couple things that I didn't like about this book, weirdly, I didn't like the prose of this one, and that has never been a problem I've had with any of Naomi Novik's other works, even the ones that I didn't like. I feel like I have never really had a problem with her prose. I didn't love the way that A Deadly Education was written, but like it wasn't like the prose, it was just like the narrative voice. But this, I felt like it was a lot of very short, choppy, repetitive sentences, and that's something that I don't love. It's a lot of also very dense description of everything that is in the room and everything that is happening and everything everybody's wearing. That's just the kind of prose that my brain cannot deal with. I start skimming, I'm like, I don't care what every single soldier is doing and seeing and wearing and thinking and tasting. Like, I just don't care. My brain shuts down. And number two, I just never really felt connected to any of the characters here, despite liking them in theory. Like, I just felt like a lot of the characters and their relationships felt more like sketches of characters and their relationships than they did feel like actual well-developed characters with well-developed relationships, which was just a shame because I really liked the concept of the relationships in this book. I loved the concept of the relationship between Kasha and...
Common in the uprooted novel.
He's literally saying it's in the uprooted novel, Agnieszka. I really liked the concept of the relationship between Agnieszka and Kasha. Just a beautiful friendship where it's like there's so much kind of hidden jealousy and toxicity maybe that could be buried there, but that they have spent their entire lives fighting and like tried to be really good friends, and they are really good friends, and Agnieszka, you know, loves her so much that she is willing to go into this haunted forest that nobody has ever successfully come out of for her, and just the length she goes to save Kasha is so it could be so interesting. But then it really felt like after they do save her, Kasha just became like so secondary to the story. She became more of a plot device than a character. She just kind of stopped being important, and they really kind of stopped talking to each other. And it was such a shame because that relationship is such a driving force in the first half of the novel and such an interesting, juicy relationship, and then we just don't get any more of it in really the second half of the novel. Similarly, I like not really similarly. I did not really like the other major relationship in this book, the major romance in this book between Agnieszka and the dragon, aka Sarkhan. It's just a dynamic that I do not like to begin with, where it's a older man and a younger woman, and the man is very powerful and the woman is kind of just beginning to come into her power, and he is extremely rude and condescending to her for no reason when she's nothing but nice to him, and then is gradually won over by her displaying competence in her field and gains some respect for her, and they enter into a relationship, a romantic or sexual relationship. But he never apologizes for how he treats her in the past, and he continues to be a massive dick to her. Like, that's just something that I hate in any romance dynamic, and in here it just was like, he was so mean to her. He did not like her at all, and it felt like their romantic relationship was solely based off this idea that using their magic together felt pleasurable. It was solely like a sexual pleasure kind of thing, and it never felt like they actually liked each other on an emotional level, or that their relationship grew on an emotional level. Again, it's just him being a dick to her, and then her winning him over by being smart and useful, and then them continuing to just have the same dynamic they've had from page 1 to page 400. I did not like that dynamic, and again, it's such a shame because I feel like some of the questions brought up in their dynamic are really interesting. Like, there's kind of this barest hint of this idea that like he's this dragon, and every like 17 years girls from her village are essentially sacrificed to him. It's like a play on like a sacrificing maidens to a dragon, you know, classic fantasy trope, but in this case the dragon is a man, a powerful sorcerer, and it turns out that he's like not sexually assaulting them or forcing them to be his maids or anything. He's just picking out girls that he thinks have magical power and is like kind of training them, or, you know, seeing if they will have magic power, and then like sends them off to have better lives and not just live in the village their entire lives. And that's all well and good, and something that I thought was actually interesting was that in here Agnieszka and Kasha bring up that, like, okay, so you don't sexually assault those girls, but like you make them afraid that that will happen to you. Like, why have you never just come and been honest about the fact that I'm trying to find magical apprentices? I'm not trying to find like a wife or a sex slave, basically. You have essentially, you're not kidnapping and enslaving these women, but you kind of are, because you still are making them afraid that that is something that will happen to them. And that is actually a concept that I think the Trader Bro Cormorant does a lot better, because they have that discussion, and he kind of is just like, wow, I never thought of it that way. In the future, I'll be sure to make sure that the girls know that that's what I expect of them. And that's just kind of it. There's never any more discussion about that, or any more discussion about the tangible power and influence that Sarkhan has over not only Agnieszka, but also over the village as a whole, or over the land as a whole. And that, again, was kind of disappointing to me, especially because I liked that it was brought up. It reminded me a lot of something that is brought up by, I put the book away and I shouldn't have, something that is brought up by Tane Shear in Tyrant. There's this moment where one of the kind of not antagonists, but like a morally gray character who used to work for the Empire, is thinking about how she kidnapped this man and was holding him in an undisclosed place. She was one of his jailers, and he offered to trade sexual favors with her in order to basically find out how his daughter is doing, if she's okay or not. And Shear refuses his advances. The character refuses his advances and gives him, information about his daughter anyways. And then the character thinks that even if she had never touched him, she's still a rapist, because she was the kind of person that took people prisoner and made them so desperate that they would put themselves in that position where they are trying to trade sexual favors that they do not want to give, because that's the only way they can hear about their family. She had coerced him and then called herself noble for placing limits on her coercion. She had chosen not to rape, but she had still kidnapped him and taken him into her power, where rape could be inflicted without any hope of justice. The entire situation was therefore evil. And that's exactly the same position that Sarkhan is putting these girls from the village in, and it's kind of brought up, but the book is not willing to go as far as to say that the entire situation is evil, like Tyrant does, because I think it's still trying to have this feel-good relationship with Sarkhan and Agnieszka. So it's like, it's treated as, oh, he shouldn't have done that, and that was not a good thing for him to do, but ultimately it's just like a mistake. Like it's fine. When I kind of more so agree with Tyrant that it is an evil thing to do, and it does kind of make him almost as bad. So yeah, I did have some major complaints about this one, but overall I did enjoy reading it. I enjoyed it so much that I am going to keep this copy that I have. I'm not going to get rid of it. I enjoyed it so much that it made me go and pick up Niobe Novik's other fairy tale retelling, Spinning Silver, which I really enjoyed. It felt like Spinning Silver took like all of the complaints that I had about Uprooted and strengthened or developed them. I really liked the characters in this one, even though it's quite a large ensemble cast with a lot of people getting POVs and a lot of people having like little bits of story. I thought that all of the characters were much better developed and much better embodied in this story than in Uprooted. I really did not relate to all of them, but I really did feel like I could understand all of them and like they were well-developed characters. I really enjoyed the platonic and familial relationships that are stressed in this book. It's much more about the family bonds between Miriam and her family, and the kind of family of choice that springs up between, oh my god, what is her name? The other girl. It's awesome that she's a major character and she's not in the bio at all. But anyways, the family relationship between the secondary characters in this story and how they relate to Miriam's family, and then also the familial bonds, the platonic bonds between Miriam and all these other people. I felt like the prose in this one was a lot more varied and dynamic. It's a very similar style to the Uprooted style, where it's a first-person, limited, very talkative kind of POV, where it's truly just like the main character talking directly to the audience. But it felt like on a sentence level, the sentences were more dynamic and varied, and we got a little bit more of a variation in the prose style with this one. So I didn't think it was bad in this one. I loved how central Miriam's Jewish identity was in this book, and I think that it's kind of a good move to just make her straight up Jewish as opposed to like a fantasy allegory for being Jewish. I don't know, it just made this book feel so much more, it allowed there to be so much more done with that identity, and to have it really be a central part of Miriam's character and her motivations at the end of the book. Like there's something she does at the end of the book because of her religion, and it is able to feel so real and feel so understandable because it is a religion that we know in real life very well, and we understand why she would do that. And so yeah, I loved that it was just, she's Jewish. It's like a vaguely like, it's obviously clearly Russia. I don't know if the towns named in this are real or not, but again, having it just be straight up Jewish, I thought was a good idea. There's a lot in this about Miriam's family and how they are looked down upon and the social stigma they face for being Jewish, and then how they manage to find community and love anyways, and how they have their own community, but also they are able to find community beyond with non-Jewish people as well. And again, it becomes a major motivator for Miriam for why she does some stuff she does at the end of the novel, and I just love that. I thought it was really well done. There's also almost like an Omelas-esque theme of this book about the idea of the few suffering for the sake of the many, and I thought that was really interesting, and the way that the story dealt with that was really interesting. Yeah, overall I just thought this was a really fun, wintry, snowy, atmospheric, good time. Again, I didn't love, again, the romance in this one either, but like I said, it's so much more focused on family and platonic bonds. The romance really only comes into play in like the last 10 pages of the book, and it is set after like a time skip in which these characters presumably interacted a lot off screen, off page. So I'm like, I don't love it, but like whatever, it's such a small part of this book that I don't really care. With Uprooted, it ultimately added nothing to the story for me, but it's every time you think you can just ignore the fact that those two characters are supposed to be romantically interested in each other, the book shoves it in your face and you can't ignore it. But in this one, it was very low-key, and it was, again, just tacked on at the very end and just added kind of a cherry on top to this story, and it led to a really great last line of this book, which, so I'll let it slide. And it felt like the relationship between, again, the very powerful man and the young woman just coming into her power. That's a dynamic that Naomi Novik loves. But this dynamic felt so much less personally antagonistic. Like, Sargon felt like he fucking hated Agnieszka. Like, he hated her personally. Whereas the Stark King in this one is just kind of in general cold and doesn't really understand human social norms. He just feels more, again, like in general cold and hard to access, not like he personally hates Miriam. And in fact, you can kind of see underneath his actions and his words that he grows to respect her over the course of the novel and grows to respect her powers and her cunning. So again, even though it's not a dynamic I love and it's not really what makes this story for me, I didn't dislike it to the extent that I disliked it in Uprooted. In Uprooted, I actively hated that part of the story, and it brought my rating down quite a bit. Whereas in this one, I'm like, well, it's a thing that exists, who cares? So yeah, I really enjoyed Spinning Silver, and I enjoyed Uprooted, and so I think I finally found the Naomi Novik books that I like. I will take off my hater hat and I will hang it up by the door. And I mean, I still didn't like those other books I read from her, but I am glad that I found some stuff that I did like. I do think she is very talented as a writer. It's just some of the stuff that she writes is not for me, but some of the stuff she writes is for me, and I'm glad that I finally found that stuff. So that was fun. I also want to talk about how in December I finished the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I read The Two Towers and The Return of the King literally on December 30th and 31st. I made it my mission that I was going to finish the Lord of the Rings series in 2025. I started it in 2024 and then just like ran out of steam and never finished it. And I was like, you're going to finish it this year. And I did, with literally 12 hours to spare. I read Fellowship back in probably like September, and it took me so long to read that book, mostly because I wasn't prioritizing it. I was reading like a chapter before bed every night, and some of those chapters are long as hell. So I did not read it very quickly, and I was not the most invested in the story. It's so much setup, like truly. These are really meant to be read as like one gigantic book, and you can tell. And so after I finished that one, I just did not start Two Towers for the longest time because I'm like, it's gonna take me forever. I don't know if I want to commit to that right now. And then randomly, I just picked it up on a whim again on like December 30th, and I blasted through these books. It took me again like 2 days to read them, and I really enjoyed them. First of all, Two Towers is really short, and then second of all, this one looks longer, but about half of it is like the appendixes, which I'm not gonna lie, I didn't care to read. Maybe I'll go back and read them eventually because I am more interested in doing that now. But I just loved Return of the King. I really did. Again, I really feel like these are meant to be read as one giant book, and then this is just so satisfying in the way that it weaves together all of the setup and really gives you a great payoff. And I had never finished Return of the King. I had never watched the movies. So I obviously knew from like cultural osmosis that they destroy the ring. They successfully do that. I kind of knew that one, but I had no idea how some of the other things in the story were gonna go. I did not know Frodo's ultimate fate, which was so interesting to me. Like, obviously this whole thing is a metaphor for war and for PTSD. Like, Frodo essentially has PTSD when he comes back from destroying the ring. I also didn't realize how much this book was gonna be aftermath. Like, they defeat Sauron and they destroy the ring, and then there's still like 200 more pages of just like aftermath, them going on a farewell tour, saying goodbye to all their allies, like spreading people up and seeing how they're gonna rebuild stuff, the hobbits going back to the Shire and having to deal with all of the greedy opportunists who sprung up in the Shire while the war was so bad, dealing with all of those people, and then again a couple of chapters of like, and here's how their lives all played out. And Frodo essentially, I thought it was so interesting that in that last chapter we are in Sam's perspective. We are not in Frodo's head really anymore. It's like a third person omniscient, but we never get into Frodo's head after he has destroyed the ring. It's solely from Sam's perspective, and that was so interesting to me. And the fact that Sam, you would think, okay, Frodo comes back and he clearly has PTSD, he cannot go back to a normal life, he ends up essentially killing himself, and it's again so Christian that he had to invent like an ethical way to kill yourself. Like, we're just gonna go west with the elves, because he cannot live a normal life anymore, prematurely essentially choosing to die because he can't go back to normal life. He's too traumatized. And I think you could assume that, oh, Sam was not as impacted and he was able to just come back and have a great time and get married and you know, he wasn't affected at all. But I think that kind of rush to just go back to normal life as quick as possible is also a sign that Sam was traumatized by what happened. The kind of rush to again get married and have kids and live a quote unquote normal life, a life that you're supposed to live, I think shows that he just kind of wanted to get back to it as soon as possible, whether that was the right decision or not. And he ultimately was so helpless in helping Frodo readjust to normal life at all, and that was so interesting. So yeah, I think I could say, like, again, I could talk for 40 more minutes about the parallel, like, again, what this book being an allegory for war and for coming back from a war totally changed, but also just on a fantasy level, this was, I do really love the world that this is, and that's why I probably, like, I don't know, I'm thinking about reading the Silmarillion or any of the other, like, various, you know, lore around this series, but I kind of like just having all this stuff be mentioned and not knowing what it is. Like, it gives me that vibe of like playing Elden Ring and just like coming across this huge ruin and like knowing that there was something there but not knowing what it was, and that's just sometimes so fun and so magical. And yeah, I don't know, I did really enjoy this and really enjoy how it wrapped everything up. It was by far again my favorite book in the series, which is so funny because it's the only one I was never able to read as a child. And now it is time to talk about space opera. It is time to talk about the like 4 or 5 space opera books I read in December. So this is gonna be, I think, fun. Let's go from the one I liked the least to the one I liked the most, I think, because I really want to talk about space. I want to talk about sci-fi. So the one I liked the least I do not have. I got it from the library. It was what is it called? The Blighted Stars by Megan E. O'Keefe. This is a book that I had seen some praise from like booktubers that I follow. I think Carrie Can Read talked pretty positively about this book, and it has a pretty high rating on Storygraph. I've never seen, you know, a bad word about it. I picked it up. Why did I think this was lesbian? Guys, why did I think this was a lesbian book? It is not a lesbian book. It is a heterosexual romance with the tiniest hint of space in it. So not for me, this one, not really for me. I did not really enjoy this book, and it was so sad because I went into it actually really enjoying the kind of first half of this book. It's a couple of really interesting sci-fi concepts, like the ability to print your consciousness into a new body, but every time you kind of like get closer to this, you know, threshold where your mind will just break and stop being able to be reprinted, and the kind of logistics of that I felt like were very well done and very well thought out. We have kind of this mysterious like disease infecting planets, and this kind of, you know, Final Fantasy VII-esque bioterrorism aspect where you have like these environmental freedom fighters versus the evil rich people who are like sucking all the resources out of planets. And then you have kind of, it's a very Mass Effect type, like, okay, let's be real, this is Mass Effect fan fiction. It just is. Naira Sharp, whatever her name is Commander Shepard. I don't know exactly who Tarquin is meant to be. I think he feels very like Sebastian from Dragon Age, maybe, where he's like a prince that has kind of rejected the family name and is kind of gonna fight for a greater cause. This wasn't like The Last Watch or the Divide series by J.S. Dews, where it was like so obviously one-to-one Mass Effect fanfiction with the names changed, and every single character in that series you could correlate, you could match with a Mass Effect or Dragon Age character. This was just more like clearly very inspired, like just the world and the main character Naira Sharp being a Commander Shepard type figure, and the idea that there's this like hive mind coming to kill you. So there were all these really interesting concepts, and the setting was really interesting, and I love Mass Effect, so I like seeing that inspiration. But then about halfway through, it really becomes more of a romance than anything else, and I just didn't really like the romance. I thought it was incredibly unnaturally paced and developed. Like, you can kind of see why maybe these characters would like each other at the beginning of this book, but there's such an animosity between them and so far that they would have to go to for that to feel natural, and instead we are just kind of told that their relationship has shifted, that now they are, you know, getting together really well. And then there's this huge, like, again, physical element to it that I'm beginning to learn just does not work for me. It doesn't work for me when a relationship is based so heavily off of the fact that they think the other person is hot. Like, that is so shallow to me, I guess, and I can't allow that to be something that an entire relationship is based off of for me. It's like, and it's done again so weirdly in this book. Like, they are in a survival situation. They crash landed on this planet. They might all have to kill themselves to get out of there and just be reprinted. But, you know, you never know if it's gonna be your last one. So it's like, not the time. Like, we are like in trouble. And a side character's being like, bro, she was checking your ass out. Like, oh, she thinks you're so hot, she wants to hit that. It's like, can we have some fucking decorum? Like, it is not the time. We're all gonna die. And that I just couldn't get down with. It also felt like the dialogue was incredibly stilted and cheesy in this, very Mass Effect-y in that way, not only in terms of the romantic like dialogue between Tarquin and Naira, but also in terms of like the friendship with the other side character in this book. Apparently him and Naira are like best friends and have been essentially like brother and sisters from a young age. They talk to each other like how aliens would assume human beings talk to each other if they had only ever seen movies and TV shows from like the 1980s. Like, it just was such a weird way for these two characters to talk to each other. It felt so over the top and so like banter-y and chummy, and just none of the dialogue felt very realistic. None of the relationships felt realistic or well developed. And again, it becomes way more of a romance than a sci-fi survival horror in the second half of the book. And so I just ended up not really loving it. And the prose of this one was so dull. Again, I'm not really a huge prose person. Like, I typically prefer plain prose over overly lyrical prose, but it gets to a point where it just feels like you're reading like a video game cutscene script, and that's what this entire book felt like. It felt like just like we were getting no subtlety, no hint into the characters' psyches, no subtext, just everyone is telling the audience exactly what they're thinking and feeling, and it's just a lot of, again, physical narration of where everyone is and what they're doing and how they're walking and what they're saying, and that is not my thing. Especially with sci-fi, like with sci-fi and with books like this where it's like a cool hive mind, like fungus, like we're reprinting people from their neural maps. Like, I want the prose to match that weirdness, and I want there to be a little bit of spice in there, as opposed to just, I walked to the door, I printed out my map, I grabbed my gun and walked out the spaceship. Like, it's just so boring. Like, where is the spice? Where's the tension? Where's the prose? Where's the describing weird things in a weird way? So I didn't love These Blighted Stars, or The Blighted Stars by Megan E. O'Keefe. I will not be continuing with the series. I also felt like the twist at the end of this book was so weird. Like, okay, spoilers if you want to read this book, but it's revealed that the rich people aren't actually the ones causing the like environmental destruction. Like, it's just something that happens and they don't, it's because of like the evil fungus hive mind. And so everything that Naira did to try to like save the environment was completely misguided. So she just blew up all those people for no reason. And this is not something that is ever like brought up by the narrative. Like, they just are like, well, I mean, we still gotta kill them because they're rich and evil, which, like, fair. But imagine if in Final Fantasy VII, like, it's revealed that Shinra like actually aren't destroying the planet with the Mako generators, and so Avalanche have just blown up a bunch of people for no reason. Like, that's weird, right? That's weird. So the next space opera book I read, and this one I actually liked, it was These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs. This one is lesbian. I think maybe I was getting these books confused because they have such similar names and are have pretty similar like vibes, but this one I liked a lot more, not just because it was lesbian, but because I really enjoyed, like, I don't know, it's just such an interesting world. It felt very, this one was not Mass Effect, this one was Star Wars. Less blatantly so than the Burning Stars is Mass Effect, but you could very much see the Star Wars influence in these burning stars, where like it's very religious, like it's very mystical and feels almost like space fantasy as opposed to hard sci-fi. There are hard sci-fi elements in this one, but the kind of main governmental system and the way the branches of government that the main characters belong to feels very religious inspired, and in fact they're even called clerics, so it feels very much like the Jedi in the ways that they worship the gods and are dress and behave themselves. So that was fun, and I do like that as well. And this one deals very heavily with the concept of genocide and scapegoating. There's a Jewish allegory in these books, the Javeni, and a huge chunk of the book is talking about how people justify genocide and how they justify the treatment of people who are the survivors of genocide, and how they will pretend like, oh, we disavow that, like that was such a horrible thing that happened, like, you know, we would never do that again, and yet they continue to mistreat people and treat them again as scapegoats and the, you know, appropriate, like the people to blame when everything goes wrong. And so that was really interesting, and I feel like that made this book stand out for me and have a bit of a unique lens and framing narrative from other like space opera books that I've read. That element was really interesting. There is a really, really juicy, not love triangle, but like arrangement of characters in this novel. I don't want to give anything away because there's this character you meet in the prologue 6 who vanishes, and it impacts these two other characters very highly, and they have spent a long time looking for this character and like, you know, trying to track them down. And throughout the entire book you're like, what happened to 6? Like, where is 6? Every time a new character is introduced I'm like, are you secretly 6? Like, who are you? And I never guessed it right, but at the end when it's revealed like the answer to that mystery, it was so satisfying, and you could go back and see all the hints for that. Like, it's something that again came totally out of left field that I did not guess at all, but that I felt like was actually planted very well and very, you know, seamlessly. Like, you can go back and be like, that makes total sense. So I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that twist, and again, just such a crazy dynamic between our three leads, and again, very gay. There's a side lesbian relationship, and that's like the cute lesbians, and then you have like the messy, toxic gay girl drama between these other three characters that is so fun and so engaging. And again, the way that ends at the end of this book, you're like, oh, yes please, thank you. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this. It felt like a very fun, different take on space opera, with centering women and centering lesbians and having all these interesting discussions. So I'm definitely going to continue with this series. My only complaint is, again, similar to the Blighted Stars, it was such plain prose, and with this one it felt kind of extra annoying because again, it was the only thing I didn't like about this book. And then also there is such an ornateness to the world building and to the setting, and none of that is reflected in the prose at all. Okay, and so to talk about prose in space opera that I actually love and think is such a good example of what I'm talking about, what I want in weird ass space opera books, let's talk about Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee. This is a reread. I've read this book like 3 or 4 times, and I love this book. I love this series. This is an example of what I mean when when I say I want the prose to be just as weird as the concepts. There's so many weird, cool concepts in this book, and I feel like the prose reflects that. Like, okay, the main character Cheris is coming across a battlefield, and this is how she describes it. Feet scraped inside out next to unblemished boots, black and gold Kell uniforms braided into cracked rib cages, gape-jawed twisted skulls with eye sockets staring out of their sides and strands of tendon knotted through crumbling teeth. A book of profanities written in every futile shade of red the human body had ever devised, its pages upended over the battlefield from horizon to horizon. That is so good. That is so weird and cool and evocative, and you can see exactly what that is trying to convey and how weird that is trying to display in a way that, like, again, you understand what's happening. She's going to the battlefield and seeing all the carnage, and in these burning stars or in the blighted stars, that would just be phrased as Cheris walked outside, she surveyed the bodies on the battlefield with horror. And it's like, that does the job, I guess. Like, it's portraying the same information as we get in this paragraph, but I love the way that this does it, and the way that this, again, lets you know this is gonna be a weird ass nasty book, and it is, and I love it. Yeah, I love this book. I do really want to continue rereading this series, hopefully this year. This is what really got me into like hard sci-fi, because I have always loved Ursula K. Le Guin, which I consider more, you know, like soft sci-fi, science fantasy. It's really more about like the sociological, the cultural things that she's studying, as opposed to like the science and the technology, whereas this was kind of the first sci-fi book I ever read where like the technology is the point and like the weirdness of that is the point, and I really love that in this book. And I love the prose. I love the prose in this book. I say yours in calendrical heresy all the time and nobody knows what the fuck I'm talking about, and it's from this book. Yours in calendrical heresy. And then obviously my one of my favorite rereads this month that I wanted to do before the end of the year, and I did, and again, kind of space opera that I really love, is Rake's Fall by Vajra Chandrasekhara. Yes, I had to reread this book before the end of the year. It reminds me so much, again, of Exordia by Seth Dickinson in the way it is really weird sci-fi, but also really smart sci-fi. And again, the prose in this is so wonderful. I will read you a selection of quotes at the end of this review, don't worry. But I reread Exordia, and I felt like on reread I totally understood Exordia. Like, all the stuff that I kind of didn't entirely grasp on the first read, I was like, okay, I got it, I'm sold. Rereading Rake's Fall, I feel like I understand it a little more, but I'm still just as confused about a lot of aspects. But it's the kind of confusion that makes me immediately want to pick up this book again and like keep physical notes and be like tracking names and characters and how they are represented through the book to try to really figure out all the details of this book, because like the ultimate picture I get, I understand the plot of this book and what happens and where the characters end up, but there's so many, again, little details that I think I'm missing in this book and that I want to understand. Like, I again want to reread this book and I want to make a conspiracy board and be tacking things up and connecting the dots, and that is such a fun reading experience for me. Like, I don't feel confused in a bad way, I feel confused in a like thank you way, like in a wow, this is fun way. This is like a reading experience that I've never really had before. Yes, and so I really love the prose in this book as well. Let's read you some quotes. This is not justice, though not injustice either. She has no illusions of righteousness. She is revenge, the last cold thing on earth. Then there's also, this one is just funny. It's all you witches of the red web talk about, I complain. The long lines of descent, blood and soul. Sounds fascist, the god says. Are you sure you want to be hanging out with these people? That made me laugh. Then also this line is beautiful. The kingdom of the birds is green and full of noise. The kingdom of the birds is blue and white. Rain made clean by generations of bots, now softly decaying on seabeds, crunching like sand on beaches. And then this one is cool too and makes me think of Saint of Bright Doors. A secret dedication. Mount Elder is sacred to the son of 7 mothers, the god of the southern garrison. The sun does not manifest in this text, but remains imminent underneath all these words by right of jurisdiction. And then, is it kind of a spoiler to be reading you the entire last paragraph of this book? It might, depending on your definition of spoiler, but really I think it doesn't ruin the rest of the book for you. It doesn't reveal anything. It's just such a great wrap up to this book thematically and such a wonderful final paragraph that I'm going to read the entire thing to you. Everybody is happy in the Golden City for a long, long time. Everybody is sad. We have time to be everything in that unspeakable place, before that end at the end of time itself, when sacrifice will be called for one last time, when all the worlds collapse into each other's arms, when we will hold ourselves so tight, timeless and alive, our last breath in our lungs, our hands held in the dark, our lips kept warm in the cold. When we find out what lies beyond worlds and time, what crimes are left to commit, what thrones remain to be overthrown. But we're not there yet. In the Golden City, the long, blessed future stretches out ahead. Most of our worlds were yet to come. It was fine. It was life. We don't have to talk about it. I love that final line. I love that final paragraph. I picked up some China Miéville this month. I have always kind of had my eye on his work because I know he was really a big inspiration to Disco Elysium, which is one of my favorite video games of all time. I love the prose style of that game. I think the writing is so well done and I love the vibes of that game. And so I wanted to dive into a little bit of Miéville's work. I picked up Perdido Street Station from my library. It was the only one of his that they had available right at that moment. I was like, let me just try this one. I got like 40% of the way into this book and then just like stalled out hard. It again was so interesting because I loved the prose of the book. I thought the prose was so good, but first of all, the info dumping world building was hard for me, and then I also just didn't really care about any of the characters or what they were doing. It just was like the plot was very slow to start and we were just really taking our time maneuvering all the pieces into place. And then I noticed that my library had on Libby The Last Days of New Paris, which was a shorter novel and seemed more like maybe a short story collection. It ended up just being a shorter novel. And I was like, let me try this one. It's shorter, it's more manageable. Let me try, it seems more action packed. Let me try this one. If I don't like this one either, I'll just drop Perdido Street Station. And if I like this one, I'll give that one another chance. I really liked The Last Days of New Paris. It again felt so Disco Elysium to me. It was very fun. Again, the prose style was amazing. I don't know anything about French surrealism, but I still really enjoyed the experience of reading the book, which is so heavily influenced by French surrealism. And there's all these interesting drawings and notes at the end of the book. There's like a fun framing narrative at the end of the book where it's like, all of this is true and was told to me by this random old guy, which is fun. Yeah, so I just really enjoyed that book. I did feel like the female character was done a little bit dirty, but anyways, I enjoyed that book well enough that I was like, okay, I'm gonna finish Perdido Street Station, even if I have to force myself. Once I got past like the 50% mark, the plot really starts rolling into motion and it becomes a lot easier to read, at least for me. The characters all started to become a little bit more active in the plot. They started to get developed a little bit more, become a lot more interesting to me. We got a couple other characters coming in that I enjoyed a little bit more than Isaac and Lynn. I ended up enjoying the second half of the novel a lot more than I enjoyed the first half. I thought ultimately the themes that we were dealing with were really interesting. I loved seeing, like, again, the idea of like how you react when you learn that a friend of yours, someone you really trust, has done a horrible thing, and how Isaac deals with that, with learning actually what Yag did and how he decides that no, I can't help you anymore. So interesting. And then the construct, I feel like within the narrative of Perdido Street Station is meant to be kind of an allegory for like austerity politics, or like the capitalism fetishizing productivity. Like it has to be as productive as possible, like ones and zeros, zeros and ones. But I feel like in our era, you can kind of read that as an allegory for AI, which is interesting. I don't know if I would read it that way, again, because I just don't think that's what it's meant to be read as, but I think you could read it that way, and it still fits so well, like it works. And I liked how that arc played out. Like I was never totally sure where we were going with that, and I thought ultimately it was really interesting. Yeah, I loved the world. I liked the world, and I thought the world was so interesting. It was just the world building. Sometimes the info dumping really got to me. It would be like we would introduce a place and then the narrative would grind to a halt so that we could go through a whole socio-political history of this area, and 90% of the time it just ended up being an indistinguishable, like, poor neighborhood despite that socio-political history trying to make each place unique and like have its own flavor. They all ended up feeling very samey, so it's like, just don't do it. But there are so many interesting concepts in this book: the weaver and the moths and all of the various species in New Corbizon, I think is what the city is called. Great commentary on capitalism and like living in a fascist state, a labor organization. Yeah, so I ended up enjoying, again, the second half a lot more than the first. I still would say I probably only enjoyed, like, I half enjoyed this book. Again, I enjoyed the second half a lot more than the first, but I ultimately felt very dissatisfied with Lynn's fate. It just felt like she had a lot thrown at her, and then we don't see enough of the aftermath of that, of how she's dealing with that. Everything we see of the aftermath is from Isaac's perspective. We don't get any of her perspective, really. It felt a little bit fridgy, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna say it's fridging or misogyny, because there were other female characters who were very active in the plot and get out okay, but that particular arc I just did not love and did not think was super well handled in the end. And that paired with, again, the treatment of the female character from Last Days of New Paris. Again, not saying it's misogynist or that China Miéville is misogynist, but it makes me raise my eyebrows a little bit. But I'm still very interested in reading more from this author. I really enjoyed both of those two works. Again, I really loved his prose. It made me go and replay Disco Elysium, which again, I loved, one of my favorite games of all time. I want to play it again, honestly, because it had been such a long time since I played, and I was just, you know, doing exactly what I did in the last playthrough. And now I'm like, maybe I should try, you know, an evil playthrough, a physical run through, be a capitalist, I don't know. But yeah, I think I'm good. There are a couple other books that maybe I would talk about, but I think I'm gonna save those for like videos where I just talk about those books. I think I want to do a video talking about the Vorkosigan saga and my opinions on it. I think I'm going to try to finish the series first, though. I still have a couple of the standalone books left that weren't put into omnibuses to read. Then I would also like to maybe do a video on the Game Changer series, because I did read all of those books, some of them more than once, over like the Christmas break, so I think that might be fun. And then another series that I'm reading the sequel to that soon, so I think I'll probably just end up talking about it when I talk about the sequel. So that was my December wrap up. A lot of good and bad books in there. There were some books, if I had filmed the video before I had read These Blighted Stars, I would have put that on one of my worst books of the year list, because I just thought that book was really bad. But other than that, I don't think my list changed at all. Hello. So my phone ran out of storage because I was accidentally filming in 4K for some reason, and I didn't realize until my phone told me I had used 15 gigabytes filming a video. Literally had already deleted everything else on my phone I could. I don't know why I'm explaining this to you. Anyways, I ran out of storage. I couldn't finish filming the outro to this video, so you're just getting a still image of the thumbnail, and I'm just gonna tell you my usual spiel. So this was my December wrap up. I felt like I had a pretty good reading month. I would love to hear if you guys have read any of these books, what you think of them, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.